The day Audrey Sinclair decided to fake a phone call in the middle of a Halifax farmer's market was, in hindsight, the worst plan she had ever come up with. And she had once tried to fix a leaking radiator with a roll of electrical tape and good intentions. She had spotted Patrick from across the garlic bread stall. Patrick, who had ended their 2-year relationship over a text message. Patrick, who had written, she still remembered the exact phrasing, "I think we've grown in different directions, but I'll always care about you as a person." As a person, like she was a LinkedIn connection he was letting go of gently. And now here he was, 15 meters away, wearing a new jacket and laughing at something the woman beside him was saying. The woman was tall, polished, wearing the kind of effortless linen that only looks effortless when it costs $400. Audrey grabbed her phone and pressed it to her ear. "Yes, hello," she said to no one, walking sideways between a honey stand and a display of ceramic mugs. Yes, I'm on my way, just give me one." She walked directly into someone, not bumped, not brushed. Full collision, her shoulder against a chest, her canvas bag swinging forward and depositing an entire jar of peach preserves onto the cobblestones, where it shattered cheerfully. Oh God! She looked up. The man she had walked into was already looking down at the broken jar, his expression unreadable. He was tall, early 30s at a guess, wearing a gray Henley that had no business looking that good on a Saturday morning. His jaw had the particular sharpness of someone who did not laugh often, and his hands were now slightly sticky with peach jam. "I'm so sorry," Audrey said, already crouching to pick up the larger pieces of glass. "I wasn't watching where I was going. It doesn't matter what I was doing, I'm sorry." He crouched down too, which she hadn't expected. "Leave the glass," he said. "You'll cut yourself. I've got it. You don't, actually." He said it without particular warmth, but also without irritation, which surprised her, just factual. He moved her hand back slightly and began stacking the larger shards with the kind of calm efficiency that made her feel briefly like she was being handled by someone who had taken a first aid course and remembered it. She sat back on her heels and looked at him. "You're being very reasonable about this. Is that unusual? You're covered in peach jam." He glanced at his hands. Something moved across his face, not quite a smile, but the suggestion of one, like the word almost. "It's fine. Let me pay for your dry cleaning, or do you have somewhere to be?" "I can. I have somewhere to be," he said, standing and accepting a fistful of napkins from the honey stall vendor, who had witnessed the entire thing with the resigned expression of someone who had seen worse on a Saturday. "But it's not urgent." It was at that exact moment that Audrey heard Patrick's voice behind her. "Audrey?" She felt her whole body do something involuntary, a kind of full system freeze. She turned. Patrick and the linen woman were 3 meters away, looking at her with the particular expression of people who have spotted an awkward situation and are too curious to avoid it. "Hey," Patrick said. He actually said hey. "Didn't expect to see you here." The linen woman was watching Audrey with a kind of gentle pity that was worse than cruelty. Later, Audrey would not be able to explain exactly what happened in the 3 seconds that followed. She would tell her best friend Donna about it over the phone that evening, and Donna would go very quiet and then say, "You did what?" in a voice that somehow contained both horror and admiration. What happened was this. Audrey turned back to the man with the peach-stained hands, looked him directly in the eyes, said quietly, "I'm so sorry, please don't say anything," and kissed him. It lasted maybe 4 seconds. His hands, to his credit, did not push her away. His whole body went very still, like a man who had been asked a question he hadn't expected and was thinking carefully about the answer. When she pulled back, she was not looking at Patrick. She was looking at the man whose expression had shifted into something she couldn't quite name. Surprise, certainly, but also something else, something more attentive. She started. "Audrey, wow," Patrick said behind her, with a small, uncomfortable laugh. "I see you're doing well." She turned. "I am," she said, and she sounded to her own enormous relief completely calm. Patrick glanced at the man, then back at her. There was a beat of complicated silence. Then he said, "Looks like you've been busy," and the linen woman touched his arm, and they moved on. Audrey stood very still until they were gone. Then she exhaled so long and so slowly that the honey vendor looked over again. She turned to face the man she had just kissed. He was watching her. "I'm Audrey," she said, "and I have absolutely no explanation that would make that appropriate." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Callum," she blinked. "That's all you're going to say? Just your name? What would you like me to say?" "I don't know. Something. You could be angry." "I'm not angry." You could be confused. I am confused, he said, but in a way I find more interesting than inconvenient. She stared at him. The peach preserve, he said, looking down at his hands again. I'm going to need to find somewhere to wash up. There's a washroom in the market building, she said. I'll walk you, as an apology, for the jam and the other thing. He looked at her for a moment, longer than was strictly necessary. Then he nodded once, and they walked. His name was Callum Whitmore. Audrey did not know this yet. She learned it in pieces over the following week, the way you learn most things that matter, accidentally and slightly too late to have been properly prepared for it. The first piece came from Donna, who called the following Tuesday because she had Googled Callum Halifax, after Audrey had described him with a level of detail that Donna felt warranted investigation. Audrey, Donna said, in the voice she used for genuinely significant information, you kissed Callum Whitmore, I know. I was there, Callum Whitmore, as in the Whitmore Group. As in, the company that owns half the commercial real estate in Atlantic Canada and just closed a $200 million deal last spring. Audrey sat down on the floor of her apartment. She was between her kitchen and her hallway, which was not where she generally received large amounts of information, but her legs had made the decision independently. That's not possible, she said. He was wearing a Henley. Rich people wear Henleys, Audrey. He picked up broken glass. Rich people have been known to crouch. She pressed the back of her hand to her forehead. She stopped. What? Normal, she said. He was so normal. He washed his hands in the market bathroom and he handed me a paper towel and he said, you should be more careful where you walk. And it didn't sound mean. It sounded like something a person says. And then he left. Donna was quiet for a moment. He didn't ask for your number? No. Did you ask for his? Donna, I had just kissed him without his permission in the middle of a farmer's market to avoid my ex-boyfriend. I was not in a position to be asking for numbers. Donna made a sound that was not quite a sigh and not quite a laugh. Okay, she said. Okay, well, that's a story you're going to be telling for a while. Except it wasn't over, because on Thursday, 2 days later, Audrey walked into the Heritage Trust building on Barrington Street, where she worked as an architectural consultant. A job she had spent 4 years building from a junior role and a lot of evenings eating dinner at her desk, and found Callum Whitmore in the meeting room on the 3rd floor, sitting across from her director, Helen, with a folder open in front of him. Audrey stopped in the doorway. Callum looked up. There was a moment, a very specific, very quiet moment, in which both of them understood exactly what was happening, and neither of them said anything about it. Audrey, Helen said, waving her in, come sit down. This is Callum Whitmore from Whitmore Group. They're proposing a major restoration project on the Garrison Block property. I thought you should be in this meeting. Of course, Audrey said, and sat down, and did not look at him for approximately 35 seconds. When she finally did, he was looking at his folder. He glanced up. His expression was exactly what it had been in the market. Attentive, quiet, difficult to read. He did not smile. But there was something in his eyes that had not been there in the market. Or maybe it had been there and she hadn't known what to look for yet. Mr. Sinclair, he said. Mr. Whitmore, she said. Helen looked between them, slightly puzzled. Do you two know each other? No, Audrey said. We've met briefly, Callum said, at exactly the same time. Helen raised an eyebrow. At the market, Callum said. Last Saturday. There was an incident with a jar. The jar, Audrey said, was my fault. It was, he agreed. And there it was again. That almost smile, the word almost, hovering at the corner of his mouth. The Garrison Block project took 12 weeks. Audrey told herself, with great conviction, for approximately the first 3 of them, that it was a professional relationship and nothing more. Callum Whitmore was a client. He was also, as she slowly learned through meetings and phone calls and one long Thursday afternoon, going over structural assessments, considerably more complicated than she had initially assumed. He had grown up in New Brunswick, not Halifax, which surprised her. He spoke about it once, briefly, when she asked about the sourcing for heritage-grade sandstone, and he mentioned a quarry near his hometown, with the offhand familiarity of someone who had driven past it 10,000 times. His father had started the Whitmore Group from a single property in Fredericton. His mother had been an elementary school teacher. He had 2 younger brothers, both of whom worked in the company. He did not, as far as she could tell, enjoy charity events, networking dinners, or any situation that required him to perform warmth he didn't feel. He was not unkind, but he was precise, and he expected precision from the people around him, and he had a way of going very still when something didn't add up that made most people in rooms with him talk faster and explain more than they'd planned to. He did not make Audrey talk faster. She wasn't sure when she noticed that, exactly. Somewhere around week 5, when they were standing in the garrison block itself, gutted, dusty, impossibly beautiful in the way old buildings are before they've been fixed and made useful again. And she was pointing out a series of original load-bearing joints that the previous assessment had missed. These weren't in the report, he said. I know. I found them last week. She pressed her hand to the exposed beam, feeling the grain of it. This whole corner of the building has more structural integrity than anyone thought, which changes the restoration approach on the east wall significantly. He was looking at the beam. Then he looked at her hand on the beam. How long does it take, he said, to learn to see things like that? She thought about it. Years, she said. And also you have to like old things. Do you? I like things that have been somewhere, she said. That have a history. Buildings that have been standing for 100 years, they've held up through everything. There's something about that. He was quiet for a moment. That's not how most people would describe structural engineering. I'm not describing the engineering, she said. I'm describing why I do it. He looked at her then, and it was different from the other times he had looked at her. It was more careful, like he was adding something to a calculation he'd been running for a while. The difficulty arrived in week 7, in the form of a woman named Renata. Audrey learned about Renata the way she learned most things she didn't want to know, accidentally. She overheard Helen talking to someone in the hallway, something about a Whitmore group gala, something about his former fiancée being back in Halifax, something about complicated timing. She told herself it was none of her business. She managed to believe this for 4 days. On the 5th day, she arrived at a site meeting to find Renata already there, standing next to Callum with the ease of someone who had stood next to him many times before. She was beautiful in a composed, deliberate way, the kind of beauty that had been tended to carefully. She shook Audrey's hand and said it was so nice to meet her. And Callum stood slightly apart from both of them, with an expression that Audrey had not seen on him before, which was to say no expression at all, in the specific way of someone who has chosen very carefully not to have one. Renata asked intelligent questions about the restoration. She was charming. She touched Callum's arm twice in the meeting, and he didn't move, but he also didn't lean into it. Afterward, when Renata had left and Audrey was packing up her drawings, Callum said from behind her, "She's not. We're not together." Audrey did not turn around. "You don't owe me an explanation." "I know I don't." She turned around. He was looking at her with that careful expression again. "She's your ex-fiancée," Audrey said. "Not a question." "Yes, and she's back. She's back in Halifax." "That's not the same as being back." Audrey held her rolled drawings to her chest and looked at him for a long moment. "Callum," she said, "what is this?" He was quiet, for long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer, which was a real possibility with him. He did not say things until he knew what he wanted to say, which she had come to understand was not evasiveness but something closer to its opposite. Respect, maybe, for the weight of words. "I don't know," he said finally, "but I think about you when you're not in the room, and I haven't done that in a long time." The building was very quiet around them. Outside, Halifax was going about its evening, harbor lights beginning to come on, the smell of rain coming in off the water. "I kissed you at a farmer's market," she said, "because I was trying to hide from my ex-boyfriend. That's where this started. I know where it started. That's not a great foundation." "No," he agreed. "But the garrison block was assessed as structurally unsound 17 years ago. And you just spent 2 months showing me that everyone who looked at it before was wrong." She stared at him. "That was a metaphor," he said, and there it was. Not the almost smile, not the suggestion of one, but the real thing, brief and slightly startled looking, like a man who hadn't used those particular muscles in a while and found them unexpectedly working. Audrey laughed. She didn't mean to. It came out before she could decide anything about it, real and a little undignified. "That was the most engineer-brained thing anyone has ever said to me, and I am an engineer." "Architect," he said. "Architectural consultant. There's a difference." "Significant." She was still smiling. She hadn't planned on smiling. "We're going to have to do something about Renata. Renata is a separate problem. She's going to make this complicated. Most things worth doing are complicated." Renata did, in fact, make it complicated. She came to the garrison block twice more in the following week, each time with a reason that was plausible, and each time with the particular attention of a woman who has calculated very precisely what she wants and is working through the steps. She told Audrey, in a coffee conversation that felt friendly on the surface and wasn't, that she and Callum had been together for 3 years before the engagement, and that she thought Audrey seemed very sweet, and that it must be an interesting experience, meeting someone like Callum. Someone like Callum, Audrey repeated. You know what I mean. Renata smiled. He runs in a particular world. It can be a lot to navigate. I navigate buildings that are falling apart, Audrey said pleasantly. I think I can manage a gala. Renata's smile didn't waver, but something behind it shifted. What Renata didn't know, what she had perhaps not thought to account for, was that Audrey had not spent 4 years building a career in a field that didn't take her seriously by being easy to unsettle. She had grown up in a small town outside Truro, in a house that was drafty in the winter and cost money they didn't always have to heat. She had paid for university herself, working summers at a Heritage Trust field office, sleeping in a van for 2 months one summer because it was cheaper than rent near the site. She did not fundamentally need Callum Whitmore's world. She had made her own. This was, in the end, the thing that undid Renata's plan. Because Renata's plan depended on Audrey being impressed by things Audrey wasn't particularly impressed by. And without that lever, there was nothing to pull. The more significant problem came from a different direction entirely, and it came from Callum's brother. His name was Russell, and he arrived in Halifax from Fredericton in week 9, with strong opinions about the garrison's block project budget and, apparently, about Callum's recent change in general demeanor. Russell was shorter than Callum, louder, and wore his skepticism openly in a way his brother never did. He met Audrey briefly at the office and said, afterward, to Callum. Callum told her this himself, which she appreciated. She's sharp, but what do you actually know about her? Enough, Callum had said. That's not an answer. It's the answer I have. Russell had apparently pressed further, raising questions about professional lines and the optics of a lead consultant and the project's primary stakeholder becoming personally involved, which were not, Audrey had to acknowledge, entirely unreasonable questions. She raised them herself, sitting across from Callum in a diner on Quinpool Road on a Wednesday evening, with coffee she hadn't touched going cold in front of her. Russell isn't wrong, she said. If this gets complicated, if anything goes sideways with the project, my professional reputation is the thing that takes the hit. Not yours. You're the client, I'm the consultant. I know that. I don't think you feel it the same way I do. He was quiet. Callum. She wrapped her hands around her cold coffee cup. I've spent 4 years building something. I can't spend it the same way I spent that peach jam. He looked at her. Just impulsively, she said. Just because something felt right in a moment. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on the table. Is that what you think this is? Impulsive? I think it started that way. Most things start as something small, he said. That doesn't mean that's what they are. He paused. I've been careful my whole life. With the company, with decisions, with everything. I've been careful to the point where I woke up at 40 and realized I had not made a single choice that wasn't also a calculation. He looked at the table, then up. You walked into me in a farmer's market with a jar of peach preserves, and you apologized, and you were flustered, and then your ex-boyfriend showed up, and instead of freezing you just acted, without calculating, without worrying about whether it was the right choice. That is a very generous reading of a fairly chaotic impulse, Audrey said. Maybe. But I haven't stopped thinking about it, and I don't think that's nothing. She looked at him for a long time. The diner was warm and slightly too bright, and a couple 2 tables over was sharing a piece of pie, passing the fork back and forth, not talking, the way people do when they've been doing that long enough that it doesn't require negotiation anymore. I'd need it to be separate, she said finally. Work and, whatever this is, completely separate. No overlap. Any decision about the garrison block gets made the same way it would have been made before, agreed. If there's ever a conflict, the project comes first, agreed, and if it falls apart, it won't. You can't promise that. No, he said, but I can tell you that I've been paying attention. For weeks. And I don't think you're the kind of person who does things. Halfway, I kissed a stranger at a farmer's market and then lied to his face about knowing him in a board meeting. You didn't lie. You said you'd met briefly. That was accurate. She considered this. You noticed. I notice most things about you, he said. That's been the experience of the last 7 weeks. Is that something you want to do something about, or isn't it? She called her mother that night. Her mother, Diane, lived in Truro in the same house Audrey had grown up in and had been widowed 6 years ago, and had an opinion about everything delivered in a tone that somehow always sounded like unconditional love and mild exasperation simultaneously. "I think I'm in trouble," Audrey said. "The Whitmore man," her mother said. "How do you know about the Whitmore man?" "Donna told me." "Donna," Audrey said, "is a menace. Donna loves you. Is he good to you? She stopped, thought about it properly. "He's very careful with what he says. He doesn't say things he doesn't mean. I've been watching for it, because I've been burned before, you know, but he's just consistent." Her mother was quiet for a moment. "Your dad was like that," she said. "He wasn't flashy. He wasn't the most talkative man in the room. But if he said something, he meant it, every time." She paused. "That's not a small thing, Audrey." "No," she said. "I know. Does he make you laugh?" He made a structural metaphor that was so nerdy I couldn't stop laughing for a full minute. Her mother made a soft sound. "Good," she said. "Marry the one who makes you laugh at structural metaphors." "Mum, it's been 7 weeks. I know how long it's been. I also know the way you sound when something matters." The garrison block was completed in November, 3 weeks ahead of schedule and with a full restoration of the east wall that the original plans hadn't included. The project came in under budget. The Heritage Committee gave it a commendation. A local architecture magazine ran a piece on the approach Audrey had taken with the original load-bearing joints, and she spent 20 minutes on the phone with the journalist explaining why the building had been worth saving. Callum came to the formal opening because the Whitmore Group was the developer and because it was appropriate. He stood with Russell and 2 other executives in the early part of the evening, shaking hands, doing the thing that he did carefully and without particular enthusiasm. Audrey arrived slightly late because she had been on the phone with the Heritage Committee about a different project, a church in Dartmouth that had been flagged for demolition and needed someone to argue for it. She walked in with her coat still on, slightly out of breath, and found Callum at the edge of the room looking at the east wall. He heard her come up behind him and didn't turn, but his posture changed slightly, a particular quality of attention. "You're late," he said. "I was saving a church. Was it worth saving?" She looked at the wall they were standing in front of, restored sandstone, original timber, the careful evidence of 100 years of weather and use, made legible again. "Everything's worth saving," she said, "until you do the work and find out." He turned then and looked at her with the expression she had slowly come to understand was not cold at all, but simply concentrated, his full attention, undiluted. The way he had looked at the garrison block the first day they'd walked through it, because it was something he wanted to understand. "I told my mother about you," he said. She blinked. "When?" "Last Sunday. I went home. What did she say?" Something moved across his face. Real warmth, the uncalculated kind. She said, finally, "You've been alone long enough." He paused. "She'd like to meet you. When you want to. No pressure." Audrey looked at him. Around them, the room was full of people who had helped restore this building. Architects, engineers, tradespeople, committee members. The sandstone wall glowed under the lights. The building, which had been declared unsound, which had been scheduled for demolition twice in the past decade, was standing. "Okay," she said. "Okay, you want to meet her, or okay, no pressure. Okay, both." She looked up at the wall again, then back at him. "For the record, the next time I collide with someone in a public market and shatter a glass jar, I'm going to be a lot more careful." "I know," she said honestly. "Probably not." He almost smiled. Then, slowly, deliberately, the way Callum Whitmore did most things, he actually did. And Audrey Sinclair, who had grown up in a drafty house and paid her own way through university and once slept in a van to be near a building worth saving, thought that it was one of the better things she had seen in a long while. Maybe the best. She didn't say that out loud. Some things you keep for yourself, at least at the beginning, held close, like the first time you press your hand to an old beam and feel, beneath your palm, that it has held.